Everybody, welcome back to Byline with Ben Dennis. We are going beyond the headlines and exploring why they matter, how it changes our day-to-day life, how we see each other, and where we go from here. There's a lot to unpack, so many headlines to dive into. We're hoping to engage casually and figure out what you are trying to discover about the world around you and make sense of the news that seems to be happening so quickly and ever-changing. So with that, today we're talking with Peter Loge. Peter Loge is the director of the Project on Ethics in Politics at George Washington University in Washington, D.C. He is also the director of the School of Public Affairs and Media. He routinely engages in public talks about how we find a way back to civility. I asked him if his project on ethics in politics is still a noble cause, considering the vitriol that seems to be prevalent in Washington, D.C. and across the country. We have found our way to certainly go at each other's throats on social media. It's easy to hide behind a screen, and I was curious to figure out a way to get out of it. So that's why I talked with Peter. After my one-on-one with Peter, I dive into some questions that I still have about hot-button issues, news headlines that are happening from Maine to Michigan to Southern California up to Oregon and the heartland of the United States. There are plenty of ways that officials need to be held to account, plenty of lingering questions that affect your daily life. We'll get to that after the conversation with Peter. However, let's dive in. Joining me now is Peter Loge, the director of Project on Ethics and Political Communication at George Washington University, School and Media Public Affairs Director as well, Strategic Comms Consultant. I'm reading your bio right now. Associate Fellow at the Timothy Dwight College of Yale University. He is probably the most credentialed person that I could find to talk about ethics and political communication, whether it be from elected officials or if it's just mom, son, and your aunt at Thanksgiving and the dreaded conversations surrounding politics around a basted turkey. So the real reason I wanted to dive in on this right now, Peter, is because, when you scroll on social media, whether it be your high school classmate that you haven't seen in 20 years, you skipped a couple reunions, and he has an opinion that he's posting about that you particularly disagree with, or you turn on CNN, Fox News, and you just see talking heads bickering back and forth. I think the first thing I want to ask you before we talk about some news elements here is make the case for why your project on ethics and political communication is still a worthy cause.
It's still a worthy cause in part because you said I was the most credentialed guy you could find. That says much less about me than it does everything else. I was a lobbyist for America's Funniest Home Videos. I'm not sure I should be the guy leading this charge. But the debate over ethics in political communication, the connection between how we talk about politics, how we talk about each other, truth, reality, facts, goes back at least to Plato. This is a really old debate. I'm just sort of trying to reinvigorate. And I don't think we're past the point of no return. Politics has always been messy. It's always been awful. People have always made stuff up, always lied about each other. Somehow we've muddled through. The U.S. has been more successful than any other established democracy, and I've got confidence that we can muddle through again.
How do we make this better on your point there?
That is a $1 million question. And if I knew how to make it better, I would not be on your podcast. I'd be on a book tour making $1 bazillion with a book called How to Make It Better. I think there are a couple of ways all of us can make it better. The first is we just need to be better people, right? Take a beat before posting something, before commenting online. What point are you trying to make? Are you shouting into the wind? Or are you trying to show off to your friends? Or are you actually trying to persuade somebody? We all just need to be a bit better. We need to be better consumers of information, right? We need to just look at something and say, if that looks too good to be true, maybe it is, even if it reinforces something we already believe. Again, take a bit of a beat. The other piece, though, is incentives. People tend to behave their incentives. We all say we're going to do the right thing, but we all shade a little bit to keep our job or to get a grade or whatever. Right now in politics and media, the incentives are to be outrageous, not to cooperate, not to use your inside voice, but it's to get attention, get clicks, get money, whatever. And I think changing the incentives around how we run elections in this country, we pay for and consume media would go a really long way to helping.
And speaking of media, tech companies face so much scrutiny from disseminating. I mean, there's been several stories about this, studies about this, where the algorithms are pushing out content not only that people would like to see, but also would disagree with. So, what role do you think that these bigwigs at tech companies have here to solve the issue that we're facing right now?
I'd love it if they were all just said better people. I've got my billion. I'm now going to devote it to responsible democracy. But the people who run tech companies are people, and they tend to behave as if they were people. Heard a story about one billionaire who said, "I have FU money. What I really want is F all y'all money." Right. And if that's the next goal, it's never going to be let's help everybody. Like, yes, they should be better people, but we also need to create incentives for them to be better people. Maybe that's us as consumers, frankly, demanding better information, right? Tweak your algorithm. You want to see different kinds of stuff fed to you through, an Instagram or whatever. Go looking for it. Follow things you might not otherwise agree with, or you might not otherwise see. One of the reasons I really dislike Instagram is because it's a black hole for time. I'm a big fan of old British sports cars and also antique books and sort of chess ephemera,
Do
all
you
of
have
which
an
makes my
Aston
wife
Martin?
crazy.
Is that what you're trying to tell me?
I would like an Aston Martin, a DB5 in
Okay.
particular
Okay.
would be kind of
DB9, I
awesome.
think, was the latest Bond car with Daniel Craig.
The
Was it?
5 is classic, though. The 5 is the classic Bond car. For me, it's the TR6. I'm a big
Okay.
TR6 fan. But as a result, my Instagram feed is full of British sports cars.
Yes.
Maybe I should mix it up a bit. It would be healthier for me and less expensive. So it's up
You
to
know,
us. We got to do it. We just got to be better people. Like, let's stop waiting for everybody else to be better at us. Maybe we should just be better.
going back to ethics and politics right now, I want to ask you some national examples you think of people that are getting it right. I think of my first person I thought of after such a horrible moment recently when Charlie Kirk was assassinated. Governor Spencer Cox in Utah had that lengthy address to the nation that was televised on uh, any cable platform in real time for people to watch. And he set the tone up front, that this is a time to really band together. I assume that you think that that is a good example of how to possibly curb the tide, if you will. Anybody else that comes to mind?
Yeah, I mean, Governor Cox has part of his Disagree Better project with Governor Moore of Maryland. More of that. Senator Coburn during the Affordable Care Act debate was in a town hall meeting, and one of his constituents stood up and started yelling about then Speaker Pelosi and how awful she was. And the senator said, "No, she's not a bad person. I just disagree with her." And he got booed. Senator McCain came to the defense of President Obama during the campaign. He got criticized for that. It's hard to do because if you stand up in front of a group of people who want to be passionate and partisan, and you actually argue for less shouting, you don't get rewarded. Right? We need more people, frankly, like Secretary Buttigieg, who I think talks about politics in interesting and thoughtful ways. I've worked in Democratic politics. I tend to support his policies, but really, I like how he talks about politics. You've got,
You like the fact
excuse
that
me,
he goes on platforms where he's challenged, Fox News, he appears
yeah,
on there
yeah,
quite.
and he just has a debate, right? He may or may not persuade anybody, but he's not shouting at anyone. He's a smart guy who believes in this country and talks about what this country can be. Danielle Allen is the same. She's at Harvard, a political philosopher, briefly ran for governor of the state of Massachusetts. Again, I tend to align with her politics, but mostly what I like about her is she talks about America in ways that resonate. Say that we're only as good as our promises, right? We can't rest on our laurels. We got to keep working to be better together. I think there are a lot of people doing it. You don't see them because they're not shouting, and shouting is what winds up in the algorithm. Obviously, unless you've got Basset Hound content, which is also in the algorithm. But the shouters have their space.
And since you mentioned a litany of Democrats there, we'll point out too that for those who are listening, Governor Spencer Cox is a Republican.
Yeah, and there are good Republicans doing this. You don't hear about them as much, which is really sort of unfortunate. One of the effects of Trump taking over the Republican Party is Republicans are reluctant to speak in public if they unless they clearly align with the president and do shouty pro-president things. A lot of conversations with Republicans in public come down to are you pro or anti-Trump rather than how can we be better together as Americans. Governor Cox is an outlier. Senator Collins has said some interesting things. Senator Murkowski has said some interesting things. There are moments, but there aren't as many clear leaders as there are on the Democratic side in this moment.
Well, Collins and Murkowski, on policy have pushed back more frequently than some of the more MAGA aligned members of the United States Senate there. Let me ask you about just some quick news items right here. I listened to part of your discussion with, I would say, a colleague in thought of yours, and forgive me for not remembering her name, but you talked about political violence and
Kristen,
ethics.
Kristen, Kristen.
Kristen Grimm, forgive me. And this was what, I think maybe a day or a couple days after Charlie Kirk was assassinated. And there was a multi-tiered approach, kind of a how-to guide, if you will, of how not only leaders should be setting the tone, but people just talking about political violence, which has reached somewhat of a, you know, feels like a cliff at some point when we see everything that's going on with, Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro's mansion, the Democrat there, that was set ablaze, I believe, during, was it Hanukkah? Was it?
It was a different Jewish holiday, but yes,
Okay.
during some of the high holidays. Yeah.
But there have been several examples here. So just, lay out, I would say, the responsibility for leaders like you had in that conversation of that how-to guide, if you will, that you discussed of how to address political violence.
Absolutely. The first thing to know is people listen to their political leaders. People listen to President Trump. They listen to Senator Schumer. They set the tone, right? And Kristen and my argument is that every time there's political violence, political leaders, also you and me, anybody, your listeners should first of all condemn it. Political violence in democracy is wrong. The point of democracy is we debate, we don't hit each other. If we're hitting each other, democracy is failing. Condemn it. Second, it is rare, right? It's in the headlines. It might be rising, but there are 500,000 elected officials in the US, city councils, mayors, and all the rest. Virtually all of those campaigns are boring, which is how it should be. Third, it's incredibly unpopular. Polling that finds support for political violence is rising. Ask people, can you imagine a situation of political violence when political violence is acceptable? And all of us can imagine something. All of us can imagine Nazi Germany or Franco Spain, but that's not Washington, D.C. in 2025. The actual support for people who actually say, yes, let's take to the streets is 1 or 2%. And those people don't tend to answer surveys, right? You're a burn down the country anarchist. You're not waiting for a pollster to call and say, so how do you feel about political violence? Thank goodness somebody called, right?
No,
And
those
the
bad
last step
actors
is,
or
yeah,
I'm sorry, forgive me, and, but it's those bad actors that political leaders will say, "Hey, this is the left, this is the right," and bundle them into a complete political category too.
yeah, they absolutely will. And they'll find the 1 or 2 outliers and they say, aha, this is the one thing that proves they are all. We had there were no King's protests recently across the U.S. Millions of people participated. I believe there were no arrests in 3 or 4 of the major cities, right? So it's not yes, somebody's going to be a knucklehead, but by and large, people aren't. Then the last part is all of us can just, again, be better, right? Not every conversation has to involve Gaza or Ukraine or immigration or tariffs. You can just be friends with your neighbors because most of politics, most of the time, is boring, right? It's who's plowing the streets, who's picking up the garbage. And that's what most of us want, right? Most of us don't go about our day to day lives wondering about whether or not, my neighborhood association should sell missiles to Zelensky. Before we got on this conversation, I went and pulled my garbage can in because on Tuesdays, I pull my garbage can in. That's politics. And the more of us who can focus on what matters to each other and with each other, there are important differences on trade, abortion, guns, you name it. Those are critical and we have to have those debates. But most of the debates are about stop signs. So maybe let's focus on those.
As you know, I work in local news, and a lot of it is service journalism, where you talk about intersections, zoning issues, school board meetings. And I mean, that's clearly lost in the conversation in cable news outlets. The audience in Montana may not care what's happening in Maine, but I get your point. You have the Center for Ethics and Political Communication. I'm curious if you might open one in ethics and government communication, considering that the USDA and HUD recently, as we're in the middle of this government shutdown, who knows when both sides are going to come to an agreement, put out these notices on their website that the reason your services might be impacted is because Democrats are causing the government shutdown. So talk about the role that government has in ethical communication too.
Absolutely. I define politically just broadly, political communication broadly. For Aristotle, politics is the polis, the polity, who we are when we come together. So government's actually part of it. It's how we talk about what we do. What the government is doing, the Trump administration is doing with partisan messaging and the shutdown is wrong. The president is saying that if you support Democrats, I will punish you. Democrats are bad for America. In democracy, we need opposition. There has to be debate. Democrats aren't bad for America. Republicans aren't bad for America. We disagree about important stuff, right? What President Trump is saying with those messages, with threatening to deploy the U.S. military to my neighborhood, which is actually kind of a nice neighborhood, to be honest. But saying all
Where do
these
you
things,
live? You're in DC?
I'm in Adams, Morgan. Yeah.
Okay. And for those who don't know, as the National Guard is being deployed to various cities across the country, first Democrat electorate majority cities, now, in some cases Republican Memphis. I don't know the electoral makeup of Memphis, the city itself. I know about Tennessee. However, Washington D.C. was after LA, at least the large scale deployment of the Guard. So forgive me, Peter.
Right. No, but your point is a good one. That he's, highlighting the partisan nature of the administration. Says if you support Democrats, I will punish you because Democrats are bad. If you support Republicans, I will reward you. I'll send federal dollars to your states, to your universities. If you're in a Democratic state, I'll send federal troops and I'll take away your services. And that's antithetical to how you run a democracy, right? It's a baseball game where one side is armed, and that's not how this should go.
There's some examples you could point out Democrats too who are, vilifying
Yeah.
a basket of voters. Hillary Clinton during the 2016 quote basket of deplorables that was met with a lot of scrutiny too. But I want to ask you also, maybe not necessarily front-facing members of government or politics, they've got a role here too in ethical communication, and those are who we in the news industry call public information officers, who we treat as official sources. A police department, crime will happen. Your point person, if you don't have well-connected sources who are on the street working the beat, is the public information officer. They're the people who are aggregating information that is deemed official. So whether it's journalists or people who are hearing directly from these communications officials with government taxpayer-funded entities, how would you best recommend consumers of information take all of that with a grain of salt and discern what is true and what's not?
That's a really good question. And I've been those people. I've been on the other end of calls from some of your colleagues when I've been at federal agencies, working at federal agencies, and when I was a congressional staffer in the House and in the Senate. Know that everybody has a point of view, right? They're probably not lying. Press secretaries or public information officers aren't lying, but they're not telling you the whole truth. They're highlighting some elements that make their boss look good. They're downplaying other elements that might make their boss look not so good. They're explaining the issue in a way that puts their boss or their agency in a favorable light. They'll say what's really important is the thing they think they're doing well. You always want to, when I try to consume news, when I consume this, I try to ask, what's the person, what's their agenda? What do they want? Like, what do they get out of this? And it could be benign, right? It could be they want me to get my COVID shot, which is a good thing to do. So I did. But it could also be they don't want me paying attention to something else, right? What else we have to be a little bit careful. The tricky bit though is we should be skeptical, but not cynical. You can't assume everybody is lying all of the time. Most people who work in politics are mostly good people trying to do the right thing, right? They're trying to be good people and advance things they believe in. And that's true on the left and the right and the center and civil servants and politicians. These are good people. So be skeptical because they have an agenda, but don't write everybody off as being evil because most folks aren't. Most folks are good people.
And a lot of the lower level staffers too, they could lose a job immediately if they cross a certain line. What is concerning you the most about the trajectory of the way that we talk to one another, engage in politics right now?
So much concerns me. I think it's the dehumanization of people with whom we disagree. If you and I disagree on something that's important to you or important to me, the conversation too often stops. And we too often don't see the shared humanity or the complexity. Right? Things are all good or all bad, or you're with me or you're not, as opposed to, you know what, it's complicated. So let's figure out the complexity. Let's agree where we can. And the point of a democracy is managing conflict. It's about disagreeing, not agreeing. If we agreed, we wouldn't need to have a vote or a campaign because we'd already be doing the thing. We have to have a campaign or a debate or a vote because we disagree. So how do we manage that disagreement in a way that makes us more democratic rather than less? And if we're not willing to engage in the conversation, even us, like we all have to be willing When we say that people have to be more civil or more open or more understanding, they usually mean somebody else has to be more understanding of me, more civil to me because I'm terrific. What worries me is maybe not enough self reflection, not enough patience with each other or ourselves, I think. It's a good question.
To me, it sounds like taking this and putting it down, maybe taking a beat, taking a deep breath. And, mom taught us when we were growing up, think before you speak.
Yeah, take a beat. I've
Being
got
simple.
post-it notes. I got post-it notes all over my office and also my notebooks. I live my life on post-it notes, and a handful of them say reflect, pause, right? Just take that beat. The other thing I think is super important is what you're doing with local media. Local media are incredibly important because they bring communities together, right? They cover city council meetings and high school sports and the Christmas fair. Local campaigns should be about local issues in local areas. And those are things like stop signs. Those are, we're going to open a school, we're going to build a new soccer field, right? And if we have local media, then we have this thing in common and not everything is nationalized, right? If there are no local media, the media we consume tend to be national media, which means local candidates for local office are asked about Gaza, which doesn't make any sense at all. Political consultants then know, well, there are no local media, so candidates have to run on national issues. So they now make local campaigns, national campaigns. We need more local media, which means you have to pay for it. If you are listening to this and there's a local newspaper in your town, pay for it. Because
I
if you
was
don't
about to
pay
say
for
this. National news is cheap. It's free.
it, and even then, it's free because people click on this stuff that gets a lot of clicks. I talk to a lot of reporters, all of whom are good people, want to be good journalists, but some of it is kind of lazy reporting because they got to crank stuff out to get clicks. You have to be doing good investigative work is expensive.
Hmm.
Pay for it. Buy your local newspaper because if you don't, you won't have a local reporter, so you won't know what's going on in City Hall. That that matters.
And I will be curious to see if consumers create news as a premium and will increasingly pay for it in the age of AI. When information is just cranked out, you want the human experience. You'd like to trust a human to go and source information about your community too. I'd be curious to see how that impacts the local media ecosphere.
That's a really good point. AI just gathers what's popular and reassembles it. It can't cover a city council meeting, right? It can look at a high school box score from a high school basketball game and turn it into prose because you're adding words next to numbers. But it can't talk about the bake sale. It can't interview the mayor. You know, it can't do all of those things that only a local journalist who knows a local market can do. Local media are it's incredibly rewarding. Problem is, it's hard to pay the rent. So really, pay for content.
I appreciate you paying nothing and me paying nothing to have this conversation, but your insight is greatly appreciated, Peter. And I'm glad we got to jump on this call. I had a one-on-one interview with you previously about a local story, but what you're working on at GW is fascinating to me, and I appreciate your time. So thank you.
Always a pleasure. I'm glad to see you doing cool new things.
We're trying to crank it out the best as we can.
Every hustle is a side hustle, right?
Yes, exactly. All right. Thank you, Peter.
Thanks so much.
Talk about tariffs. We continue to see the price of many essentials rise. Some have gone down. Gas seems to have eased, but imports from China, anywhere that the United States has tariffed a large tax in order to bring in their goods, that is certainly weighing down the wallets of many Americans. It's been documented pretty extensively here in Washington, D.C., where I report for local news on DC News Now, but also across the country. I'm curious to see what comes out of President Trump's meeting with Chinese President Xi. We don't know if they'll make some headway to maybe alleviate the tit for tat over these tariffs, not to be alliterative, but it's something that the American public, I'm sure, would like to get some relief on when they're receiving goods or getting goods with parts that are made from China. We'll also be curious to see how their talks might change the needle positively, negatively, in terms of the United States' perspective on Taiwan. I'm also curious to see if there's any talks about the Russia-Ukraine war as well. We know that China and Russia have been allies as of late and supporting each other with military might in several capacities. See if that might also influence any change with Russian President Vladimir Putin and trying to wrap up the war there. The shutdown showdown. So many people are now scrambling to figure out how they're going to put food on the table. Folks that rely on SNAP, EBT food stamps, as we've long called them. Starting November the 1st, that funding has run out. The USDA said on their website that that's going to be the case. Now, some states are providing funding to at least temporarily make sure that these recipients of SNAP are made whole. But they said that the money's not going to be forever. This is money that's available, either a surplus or another type of funding that the state has to their discretion in order to make sure that residents in their states are okay, at least for the time being, until federal government officials can get together in a room and end the government shutdown, as we're a month into it. Not yet breaking a record, as we're recording this on October the 30th. It's a Thursday here. We'll see if they finally get to an agreement. President Trump said on Air Force One that at his recent visit to Walter Reed Medical Center, which is just outside of D.C. in Bethesda, Maryland, that he had an MRI done, but it was perfect. He didn't say why he got an MRI, what it may or may not have found, but plenty of doctors have come out and said that MRIs are not part of routine physicals. They say that they have to have a reason, typically, in order to investigate further. No idea what it was for, at least at the time that we're recording this on October the 30th. The president did not say specifically, telling reporters that they should go and ask his doctors. Well, after President Trump was hailed for brokering that Middle East ceasefire between Israel and Hamas, it seems that the ceasefire has ceased, if you will. Israel recently claimed that Hamas fired on Israeli defense forces, killing 2 at the time. Israel then sent missiles attacks back into Gaza, killing dozens of people. As of late, one recent round of strikes reportedly killed 100 people during Israeli strikes in Gaza, according to Palestinian officials. Who knows if President Trump may jump in yet again after his tour on Asia. He can place calls wherever he wants, no doubt, in order to end the fighting there. We know that the hostages have been released, those who did survive captivity with Hamas for over 2 years. They're still working to bring back the bodies of those who died in the hands of Hamas. Who knows when a ceasefire will actually hold between Gaza and Israel? Hamas, rather. Democrats continue to vouch for extending Obamacare subsidies. These were tax credits that helped bring down the costs of health care for those who opted into plans supported by the Affordable Care Act. Either programs that are managed by the federal government or by the states. However, because those tax credits have not been extended, those premiums are expected to go up next year. And right now, the Trump administration has put out an online planner toolkit, if you will, where people can go and access and predict how much more their healthcare premiums could rise. I'm going to look down at my notes here. Some notes from a recent readout, according to the New York Times. They say most of the more than 20 million Americans covered under the Affordable Care Act don't pay full price because of income-based tax credits that make coverage affordable. Those enhanced subsidies expanded in 2021 and are set to expire next year unless Congress acts. That is something the Democrats continue to say needs to be addressed immediately. Republicans continue to say that they want to address health care and questions and concerns lingering about this issue, but they first want to get the government open and then address it. Have you been scrolling on social media lately and you see AI-generated videos? Some you might not even realize are AI-generated. I talked about it with Peter in my conversation earlier, but others seem to be tailored to you specifically. Maybe you have a certain interest, a certain type of travel account that you follow. You frequently bake, and so you follow a whole bunch of chefs on Instagram. Maybe you're getting AI-generated videos in that category. Maybe you're interested in finance, and you're getting AI-generated videos that are tailored to you. I'm curious to see what your experience has been like online, and you spotting videos that you suspect may be real, may not be real, and questions that you might have for the experts. This is another conversation I want to dive in on. The state of AI, how American consumers who want that human experience can make sure they're getting it, or can navigate the world that is increasingly using AI. People have questions whether their jobs are going to be jeopardized because of artificial intelligence. They also want to know how it's changing their day-to-day life. I want to dive in on that conversation. So any questions you have, be sure to send them my way. DM me on Instagram, TikTok, I'm on Twitter as well. You can always email me at bylinewithbendennis@gmail.com. That inbox is open for any questions, comments that you might have, and suggestions. And I'm hoping to open up this conversation to anybody who wants to engage with the experts. And I'm hopeful to take your questions to them. Try and get some answers here. Again, to go beyond the headlines and exploring why they matter, how we can come together and understand them, understand concerns of other people, and where we go from here. So with that, I appreciate your tuning in to another edition of Byline with Ben Dennis. I'm hoping to make this a weekly effort, at least initially, posting one-on-one conversations when I can if they happen more frequently. However, I'm excited about this, and I really appreciate you tuning in, and I'm hopeful that we can engage in the future. So we're going to have a lot of fun. Thanks, guys. Have a great week. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you later. Take it easy.